Hey guys, this is Patrick Hall with Fstoppers.com, and I'm really excited because today we are releasing another sponsored free tutorial where you guys can go out on location and see how I would tackle a 4-image fashion shoot. The goal for today's shoot is to take 4 completely different looking images that could be used on a landing page of a fashion brand or a local boutique store. I'm going to be working with 2 incredible models, a stylist and a talented hair and makeup artist, and we have access to this incredible property. But before we head out on location, let me talk about some of the gear that I'm going to be using throughout the day. The first sponsor for today's video is Gravity Backdrops, and for the last year or so, Gravity Backdrops have been the backdrop for our entire YouTube channel. We absolutely love these backdrops. They come in all sorts of sizes, colors, textures, and you can even get double-sided canvases. You can use the link in the description below for free shipping on all of their large plus and extra large canvases, as well as any of their package deals. Today we have 3 unique canvases at our disposal, including one huge canvas that was custom made just for this photo shoot. The next sponsor is Exposure Software, and at the end of this tutorial, I'm going to be putting 4 of my favorite images through Exposure X5 and giving them a final edit. Exposure X5 has a bunch of industry-leading features like 3D color masking, quick skin smoothing, and customizable camera profiles that let you import your images instantly with your own fine-tune adjustments. This is super useful if you shoot with different camera manufacturers and you want to import all of your images at one time and have them all have the exact same look. I've been using Exposure for about 15 years, and almost every single one of my final images goes through this software. If you want to see how I edit all of these images, jump to about halfway through this video where I start the post-processing section. For today's camera system, Fujifilm has actually sent us their highly acclaimed GFX 100 medium format mirrorless camera. This camera is an absolute beast. It has 102 megapixels, fast autofocus and face detection, and what's really exciting is they also have the fastest burst mode shooting in its class at 5 frames per second, which is insane for a camera with 100 megapixels. For this shoot today, I'm going to be working with the 32 to 64 f4 zoom lens, as well as the Fujifilm 110 f2 prime lens. For lighting, I'm going to be using a couple Profoto B10 strobes. These are my absolute favorite lights of all time because they're so lightweight. You can use these out on location with the battery, but you can also plug them in and use AC power in the studio. And they're extremely powerful despite this small form factor, which makes them excellent for traveling. Now, if you have their TTL remote, you can also shoot with HSS, which is going to allow you to shoot much faster than a camera's native sync speed. This works on almost all camera manufacturers, including the Fujifilm GFX 100. I personally own a few of their Air remotes, which allows me to use the B10s on any camera. And finally, when I need to lock down my composition or I need to shoot with slower shutter speeds, I'm going to be shooting with the Manfrotto 055 Xpro 4 tripod with their incredibly strong Xpro ball head. I love this tripod because it's made of carbon fiber, so it's extremely lightweight. It packs really small, so it's easy to travel with. And the Xpro ball head makes it really quick and easy to put your camera into any orientation and lock it down nice and tight. Now, if you want to check out any of the gear that I'm going to be using today, head to the link below in the description. But for now, let me get packed up, head out on location, and the next time you see me, hopefully, we'll be creating some interesting fashion images. So the goal for today's photo shoot is to come out here, take a couple fashion shots with different lighting setups that look completely different, and maybe you guys can adapt one of these to your own photography. We're here on this amazing plantation. I mean, I don't know, this is probably over 200 acres of hunting grounds and plantation grounds. There's like stables and all these amazing trees that they're growing and everything. And so the first thing I need to do is we're actually gonna walk around the property and figure out exactly what we wanna shoot. A lot of this is kind of like a nature reserve, and so while there are some amazing trees and plants and ponds and waterways, I think I want to do something more with the buildings here. So I have a feeling we're probably going to be shooting at some of the barns and some of the little hunting huts that they have built around here, but first I need to go around and check out all the possibilities. Right now the girls are in hair and makeup and they're getting wardrobe done. Let's go over to the stable here and start with one of the most simple shots that you could do if you're trying to shoot fashion. All right guys, so here we are in this cool rustic barn. We're here with Augusta. And that's a cool name. I don't know if I've ever met anyone with another Augusta.
Thank you.
We're doing a shoot for like a local designer or a boutique.
Mars to Heart.
Mars to Heart. So the whole idea is they need a bunch of new catalog shots for their Instagram, for their Facebook, and probably their website. And we're gonna just be walking through a bunch of lighting setups that you can do so that you guys can feel confident taking awesome pictures out on location. So I think for this shot, I'm just gonna have you up here against the wall and we're just gonna do some kind of high-key single light source pictures. All right guys, so here we are in this stable. Now this is one of the most beautiful stables I've ever been in. It's got these really cool white painted walls. And the first thing I wanted to show you is the most simple lighting setup that you could do. If you're shooting fashion, especially if you're doing catalog work, many times you just need to use a single light source and have the most contrasty images that show off the clothing. And the reason you want to use one light source is the harder the light, the more shadows, the more color, the more it's going to show off the clothing. So if you ever look through a magazine or you're at the mall and you look at images, most of those images are almost always going to be shot with one single hard light source. What I have here is the Profoto B10. I put a reflector dish on it, and I'm going to raise this, I don't know, about 10 feet in the air, maybe 8 feet, and we're going to find that perfect angle where we can get that hard light hitting our subject. It's going to kind of mimic sunlight. And I want some shadows, but I don't want any of the shadows from the nose going into the mouth. And you also don't want those raccoon eyes where you have the shadows from the upper brow casting into the eyes. So you really want to find the perfect location where you have some definition with shadows, but the shadows are falling on the face in a flattering way. Now, Profoto is a sponsor of this video, but I actually personally own these, and I love the Profoto B10s because, why? They're so light and convenient. I can throw a few of these in my backpack. I actually traveled from Puerto Rico here with 2 of these. They're super convenient to travel with, and because they have the little battery packs built onto the side, you don't have any cables. There's really no other light to use that's easier than a B10. Now, we're using the Fujifilm GFX 100. I have their 110mm lens that goes to f2, so I can get that shallow depth of field. Normally, I would probably shoot at f8 and get a lot of depth of field for catalog work, but because the background here is pretty white and there's not a lot of detail, I'm gonna shoot wide open, and it would be very easy to select this image and put it on a different background if you wanted, but since we're doing kind of a higher key portrait, this is gonna work perfect. Now I'm shooting at the highest sync speed on this camera. I'm shooting at f2.0, and then I'm shooting at the lowest ISO, which is ISO 100. So we're gonna be doing some 3/4 shots, so it's just gonna be kind of waist up. And as I shoot, I'm gonna try to get some serious shots and some happy shots so that the clothing designer has a lot to choose from. And as I'm shooting, one thing I definitely want is I want Augusta to move a lot and change up her expression. Perfect. Now, as you look at these shots, one thing that's kind of cool that I didn't really plan for is this little bit of light that's spilling through on the side. I think it just gives it a little definition, and if you wanted to retouch this out, it would be super simple. So as you can see, these images look great. There's nothing super crazy about them, but every photographer needs to know how to create an image like this, because if you're hired to shoot, say, 100 looks in a single day, this is probably the easiest lighting setup that you're going to want to use. So here we are, we're still at the barn. This is Shelby. Shelby's gonna be modeling for us. Shelby, what are you, like 7 foot tall? You look 7 foot tall on these heels.
Yes, I might be.
You might be today. We're actually gonna go inside the stables. The other stable we were just at was really nice and clean. This one's got a lot more mood. It feels like a real stable. And I think we can use these barn doors next to me and create a barn door looking light.
Yeah,
how about that?
All
right, let's head in there. All right, so the idea behind this shot is I actually want to replicate some hard light coming through a really narrow opening. And we have these cool barn doors. And if you're a photographer, you've probably used barn doors. Today, we're gonna use real barn doors. So I have one B10 right up here, and I'm gonna position it and close this door just enough so there's a sliver of light that can sneak past the door. And we're gonna hit Shelby right on the face. It's going to give this really dramatic lighting setup where her face is lit really well, but then we're gonna have nice fall off on the clothing. Now, because this is a fashion shoot, we do need to show some of the clothing. We can't have it go completely black. So I don't know if you can see this back here, but we have another Profoto B10 in a 1x3 strip box. I've put that off to the side, and it's just gonna add a little bit of soft fill light skirting across her clothing so that you can still make out the clothing while still having a really dramatic looking shot. So for this shot, I'm shooting with the Fujifilm 32-64 zoom lens. I'm shooting wide open at f4. My settings for this is I'm shooting on this Manfrotto tripod so that I can slow the shutter down. I want to get some of the ambient light in here. There's not much, but I'm really at about an 80th of a second, sometimes down to a 15th of a second. And you may know if you shoot with a really slow shutter speed and you're hand holding, a lot of times you'll get blur even with flash. So I put the GFX 100 on this Manfrotto 055 tripod, and I'm using the Manfrotto Xpro ball head, which allows me to get the camera really in any orientation really quick and easy. I can lock this down, I can get my composition, and I'm gonna really just play around with the lighting to make sure that sliver of light is hitting her perfectly, and I can do that just by opening this and shutting it just a little bit. As you can see from these test shots, if I open the door a lot, I get a lot more light falling on David, and then if I close it, I can get that nice little sliver of light. I can do the same thing here. So as I'm taking pictures, I'm just kind of adjusting this so that I have a nice variety. Some are moodier than others, and then some are a little bit more airy because I'm letting more light in, and if I drag that shutter, I get a little bit more of the ambient light in this barn. Now that I have some really cool shots, the final thing I'm gonna do is add a little bit of fog with this small smoke machine, and as the fog fills the room, it's just gonna add even more atmosphere. Now, as I'm shooting with the smoke, I think I could actually use another light. So I've set up a third and final B10 just in the other stable, shooting kind of in the background. It's lighting up the background more than I like, but it's also illuminating the smoke, which looks kind of cool. When I get back to post and look at all these images, I'll figure out which one I like the most. So as you can see, another really dramatic shot. This probably isn't something you would do for a catalog look, but it might be more of a hero shot. So if you have a cool outfit like this in a cool environment, you can do an extreme lighting setup like this, and all you need is a barn door right behind your camera. Super easy, anybody can do it. So here we are in this really cool, I'd almost call it a barn, but it's actually like a meeting place for hunting. So I definitely have to shoot in this room because this is probably gonna have the most character of anything that we do today. Now, there's a few challenges that I have. First of all, there's really no beautiful light coming in here, even though we have a doorway and we have a couple windows. The second challenge that I have in here is there's all these beams in the ceiling, which is gonna make it really hard to get certain light modifiers in here. So I probably can't raise a large octabox because it's gonna hit these rafters, and so I need to figure out exactly what light modifier I wanna use. And then the third problem in here is that because all the walls are red, we're gonna get a lot of color casts. I think I'm actually gonna embrace that and try to create a much warmer image, but we'll see about that when we get to post. Now, while the girls are getting hair and makeup done and the stylist is getting them in the clothes, I figured this would be the perfect time to get the lighting set up so that they just literally come in, we snap these pictures, and we're on to the next location. The first thing that I wanted to do in setting this up was I wanted some nice hard light spilling into the scene so that it has more of a late afternoon feel. Luckily, this entire side of this barn is in shade, so I just put one B10 outside with a reflector dish, and I worked on the different placements. You can see that in these images. And the final placement that I decided was this one here. I felt like it gave the most contrast in the scene. This room also has this map with this plexiglass over it, and it's permanently installed in the wall. So I thought, how in the world can I shoot in this direction and hide that? And I thought, you know what, this would be a perfect time to put a gravity backdrop up. So one of the gravity backdrops that they sent me to use in this photo shoot is this nice brown one. It's kind of a taupe color and it's very subtle, but it works perfect in this location. So instead of trying to Photoshop out this map, I simply put a light stand in here. We put the backdrop against the wall. And I think by adding this backdrop, it's gonna make it feel like a high-end photo shoot, but we're still using a lot of the natural character that this barn has. So now that I've designed the set with the hard light coming in, let's talk about the lighting that I need to illuminate the girls. What I'm actually using here is another Profoto B10, but this is what they call a soft lighter, and basically it's just an umbrella with a diffusion panel. And when you fire the strobe into the umbrella, it lights a large light source, and then it softens it even more by going through this diffusion panel. And because this one, I don't know, this is about a 46-inch umbrella. I think this light modifier is perfect for getting it high in the rafters. It's gonna give me some directional light coming from the top down, and it's also nice and soft, which is gonna be much more flattering on our models. Now, the beauty about setting everything up in the scene is once I have the camera set, I can pretty much set it and forget it. The light's not changing, I don't have to do anything. For this shot, I'm shooting at 1/125th of a second, which is the highest sync speed for this camera. I'm shooting wide open at f4 to give that nice medium format look. And then I am having to bump my ISO up to about 800 because it's so dark in here and I want some ambient light, but I'm really mainly using these two light sources for the entire lighting in the scene. For this shoot, I'm gonna be using the 32 to 64 millimeter. Now in full frame, that's about a 25 to 50 millimeter. So just keep that in mind when you see these images on the screen. All right, for this last and final shot, I'm going to take a bit of a gamble. We've set up one of these massive gravity backdrops behind me out in this field, and I thought it would be kind of cool to shoot tight so that it looks like a studio. I want to just crop into the background, but wouldn't it be cool if the ground was all of these high grasses and they were kind of walking through the grass late in the day? Now the sun is setting right behind the camera and I'm getting kind of the last bit of direct sunlight. The models are still doing hair and makeup, so I believe I'm gonna have to light this with strobe, and my concern is, can I get the flash far enough away that it still replicates the sun and lights this entire area? It might be a little too bright for that right now, but in about 10 minutes, it might be perfect. All right, so the sun is already set, and I thought that would be a problem because I wanted the hard sunlight to light the entire scene. We're not gonna be able to do that, but I think it's actually turning out pretty cool. If you look at these photos, you can see all the light on the trees is completely dark. So what I've decided to do is just zoom in a little bit and make this more about the backdrop. These backdrops are really cool. They're all made in Europe and they're shipped over here. I definitely wanna highlight this, and when do I ever have a huge backdrop like this in an open field? Really never. So what I'm doing is I'm just setting one Profoto B10 high on a stand. I have this at 8 power, so it's almost all the way up, and it's illuminating the entire scene. And then if I mix in a little bit of ambient light, it's actually filling it in and it looks pretty natural. And I was told that all of this grass that I like so much is broom grass. So you can see with the long lens and a shallow depth of field, it's all kind of blurring. Now because Augusta is moving really quickly, I'm able to shoot with a high frame rate, so I can literally just sit here and knock off a bunch of pictures as she moves. Go ahead and give me a series of poses. And really the only limitation is the strobe lights. I'm shooting at a pretty high power, so the strobes are actually having to recycle, but when it gets a little darker and I can turn the strobes down, I could actually fire even quicker. For the majority of this shoot, I was just using a B10 to try to emulate late day sun right on the horizon. But then as the sun completely set, I did throw it into a soft lighter just to give a more soft directional light. I like both of these. They're both kind of subtle, but it's always nice to have a couple modifiers in your bag so that you can quickly change the quality of light. So at the end of the day, what do I think of using the GFX 100? I have to say Fujifilm really knocked it out of the park with this. This is a pleasure to use. Unlike a lot of the cameras that are much smaller that a lot of photographers gravitate towards, this camera has a design element that's more what I'm used to using with my older cameras, and it really is kind of a seamless transition. And one thing that I intentionally did a little differently on this shoot than other shoots I might have done in the past is I shot a little bit wider knowing that I have 100 megapixels to zoom in on. So especially out here, I thought maybe I want to crop in and show only the backdrop. I intentionally shot wider so that I have both options. When I was on a 16 or 24 or even 36 megapixel camera, you really want to save all those pixels and have the highest quality, but having 100 megapixels, we'll have to see. I'm going to open these in post and see how much cropping I can do. It's an extremely valuable tool, especially when you're shooting with clients that might have a ton of different crops that they want to use in different advertising campaigns. I can see where having 100 megapixels is going to be a really nice option to give your clients. So I'm getting eaten alive by mosquitoes out here. I have all these burrs all over my legs. Let's get packed up before it gets too dark, and I'll see you guys in the post-production studio. All right guys, so here we are in the post-production studio, and I just wanted to walk through a few of my favorite images from the shoot and give you an idea of how I might edit these to give them a final look so that they have more of a commercial look instead of just something straight out of the camera. So this portion of the tutorial is sponsored by Exposure Software. If you haven't seen this on our channel before, Exposure Software used to be Alien Skin, which is one of my all-time favorite softwares out there. Now they recently released Exposure X5. This is the standalone suite that I'll be using today, but you can also use this as a plugin for both Lightroom and Photoshop if you prefer editing there. So in order to get started, let's hit Add Folder Drive and let's find our images. Now I've put these on the desktop under Morris DeHart. We can hit Select Folder. So as you can see, these are all of the images from the shoot. These are the best images. These are kind of my keeper shots. I've gone ahead and culled through everything. I got rid of all the scouting shots. I got rid of all the test shots, anything that wasn't worth keeping. But let me show you how you can go through here and rate these images if you wanted to cull through everything from the beginning. So if I click on one single image, it's going to change the format here so that I see one large image with my film strip here below, and then simply using the number pad over here, I can rate anything 1 through 5. Now the rating system that I like to use, I like to rate things 1 if I'm going to delete them, 3s are images that are worth giving to my client, and then 5 are going to be the best images from the entire photo shoot, and usually these I will give kind of a final look, or maybe I'll throw these in and retouch them a little bit more than I would a standard 3. So let me just show you, if I go through here, I've already rated these. So I might hit 5 to keep that image. I'm going to hit the right arrow to advance to the next image. Maybe this is a 3. Even though Shelby's smiling here, I don't really feel like this image does anything for me, so I might give that one a 1. And now we move to Augusta. This seems a little blank. Might give that one a 1. Not a big fan of that either. This one's pulled out a little bit more. Maybe that's a 3. That's got a little bit more energy. Maybe I give that one a 3. And then I really love the expression out of here. I'm going to give that one a 5. And so essentially I could go through this entire photo shoot, narrow all of the images down, rate them, and then if I wanted to show only the images that made the cut, I can come down here, and if I choose the 3-star, it's going to organize everything that's 3 stars or greater. So this would be all of the best images from the photo shoot. For this little part of the tutorial, I'm just going to show you guys the 5-star images. These are the images that I think are the absolute best. So these first 2 shots are nice just because they are kind of 3/4, maybe a little bit more. They show a lot of the clothing. They're shot a lot more wide angle so you can see a lot more of the scene. And as you can see up here, we have 100 megapixels to work with. So that means if I want to come up here and say do a really crazy crop, I could do something like this where I make a true 3/4 shot. Maybe I even crop off some of the hat there. And I've completely changed the composition, but when I zoom in, I mean, look how much resolution there is there. It's going to have to render because these files are huge. But what the GFX does is it gives us a lot of room to play if we want to come back here and make some really unique crops. So that's why, again, I was shooting a little wider throughout this entire photo shoot, just so I had the ability to come in here and crop exactly what I wanted. So, you know, maybe something like this is probably what I would maybe not give to the client. I'd probably give the client the full res image just so they could do this, but something from my website, maybe I crop it like this or give it just a little bit more breathing room there. So really cool. I never thought I'd see the day where we needed 100 megapixel files, but having worked with this camera, it is nice to see the possibilities, and it also gives you a lot more room to play when it comes to editing. I'm not going to go through and edit these images because the shot from this session that really got me excited was the images with both of the models in the same frame. And as you can see here, I have the fake sun coming through the window, casting all this nice light from outside. It's adding all this really cool texture to this little bench that they were sitting on. I absolutely love this image. Let me just show you a few more frames from here. This one's really cool. This might be my favorite image out of all of them just because I love the different body language both of them are giving. But then there's something about this image where they're almost mimicking each other. I like this a lot too, and I like that the flare is coming through the window just a bit. So let's take this image and let's just do a quick edit. Now, this is the rendering straight off of the raw file, and as you can see, there's a lot of detail in the tones, but using Exposure X5, we can bring back a lot more detail and give this an overall look that is going to be a little bit more commercial than just something straight out of the camera. So the first thing that I probably want to do is bring out some of these shadows. So I can come over here and just drag the shadow slider to the right. And maybe somewhere around 35 is pretty good. I still want it to be kind of moody, and I want there to be some darker tonalities in the background, but I do want to show both the backdrop and some of these wood planks that are in this little room. So that's pretty cool. Let's play around with our highlights and see what that does. So the highlights are going to be the most extreme part of this histogram over here, probably making up like the 5% on the far right, whereas the whites are going to be kind of the 10% below that. So in many cases, I like to bring my highlights down, preserve some of those details, especially when using flash, and then I can bump the whites up here and find a place that sits really well in the overall tone. Another slider that is really useful is the blacks. And typically I like to bring the blacks down and crush the blacks. That gives the darkest part of the image some pure black. If I come up here and hit this little triangle, you can see the parts of the image that are going to be pure black. I think in this case, I might actually want to open up some of the blacks. And that gives this image kind of more of a muted feel. When you have no blacks that are perfectly black in your image, it gives you that matte feel, which is pretty cool at times as well. Now I might come up here and bump the contrast up just a little bit, and that's going to basically add kind of an S-curve to the overall exposure and contrast, and that is going to bring back some more blacks into the darkest tones, but it's also going to punch the whites up just a little bit. Now, one thing that's a little tricky about these images indoors is that I am shooting at 5,000 Kelvin, but because the room is so warm and it's got all those red tones, this image really has a warm look to it. So if I went to something that might be a little more natural in their skin tones, you can see it's just making the whole image really, really blue. And this feels too cool. This doesn't feel like the tone that you would expect when you're looking at something that registers in your mind as being warm. We have that sunshine coming out, we have that foliage outside, and then we're in a cabin. So it would make a lot more sense to have this warm, but if we go too warm, you can see it quickly becomes this ugly yellow color. So this is going to take some real finessing to try to find that perfect white balance temperature. And keep in mind, I'm doing this all by eye. I'm not trying to put a color checker in there and get perfect white balance. Now, if you were shooting products that have to have true colors, you definitely might want to do that. But a lot of the images that I edit, I'm going more on feel and emotion than I am on actual reality. So in this case, I think something right here on around 4,800 looks pretty good. And then I'm just going to slightly bump up the magenta tones, maybe to 22, just so that I can pop the littlest bit of pink into this image, and I think that's going to help bring out the skin tones a little bit. So now that I have everything looking pretty good here, let's come down here to clarity. I like to add a very subtle amount of clarity to most of my images, maybe something around 10. And then typically with an image like this that's very monochromatic, there's not a lot of color in this image, I might actually bring the saturation down a little bit just to mute the colors even more. Maybe that's a little too much, maybe like around -15. And it still keeps the warmth in here. It almost adds like a sepia tone, which I think works incredibly well for an image like this. But for this particular image, I'm going to set this back to 0 because there might be a preset that I'll add to this that will give me a completely different tonal quality to the image that I can't quite do just with the saturation slider. So once I have all the exposure settings done and I feel like this image looks pretty good, the next thing I want to do is just add a simple crop to this. I don't like that you can see the furnace right over here, and I think this image might be a little too wide. I don't need to see all of this information, especially if this was something I was going to put on the web and I was going to treat this as more or less a final image. So I don't want to cut off too much of her hands. I'm probably going to crop this just very subtly. And I can probably do away with a lot of the top of the C-stand here. We don't need that grip arm showing. I just want a hint of it so that you know it feels like a photo shoot. It kind of has that, Vanity Fair and Leibowitz feel to it. So something like that looks pretty good to me. Now, one thing that drives me crazy about this image is, for whatever reason, I feel like the contrast on Shelby here looks great, but the contrast on Augusta back here, I feel like she's getting a little washed out. So what I want to do is I want to add some contrast to her face and maybe even pop her skin tones. You got to remember the flash was a little bit further away from her, so you're having a little bit of fall off. She's not getting the same light that we have here on Augusta. So what I can do here in Exposure X5 is they have a great system to add layers where I can manipulate certain things in the image and not make it a global change. So if I hit Add Layer up here on the top, it copies the image and it goes ahead and adds a layer mask. If I click on the layer mask here and then pull down on this menu, there's actually a lot of settings that we can change with this top layer. So if we come down here to presets, they have a bunch of these, just blur, burn, clarity, contrast, cooler, dodge. They have a bunch of different settings that you can do. What I want to do is I want to burn this in. So if I click on that, you can see in this thumbnail, it's making the image much, much darker. And if I right click and hit invert mask, I can now see what this is doing. And all it's doing, if I scroll down here, it is bringing the exposure down quite a bit. So I can tweak this to my liking. Let me find a good place where I'm actually just going to edit this so that her face looks really nice, almost as a final edit. Somewhere right there looks pretty good. But let's bring those blacks down so that I can get the contrast back that I wanted in her. And then maybe I even bump up the highlights so I get a little bit more light on her face. Maybe it's the whites. And maybe I bring the saturation down. I can tell it's getting a lot warmer. Something right there looks pretty good. And now what I can do is I can invert the mask again so it hides that. And if I click on the brush, and let's set this to a low flow, maybe about 28, high feather, I can just come in here and paint on the top part of her body there and just add the slightest bit of contrast back on her face. If I come over here to this layer, I can turn this off and on, and you can see what it's doing. It's just making her face pop a little bit more. Maybe I could even just pop her hands just a little bit as well. And if I select the mask and just hover over it for a few seconds, it will actually show me what I've done here in red. So you can see I've just manipulated the light on her face just a little bit. So I think that's a great edit. Let's come down here now and let's add one more layer. And let's go over here to our presets. And if you don't know what their presets are, Exposure X5, this is probably the strongest part of this entire suite, is they have a ton of different film looks that they've emulated, as well as some other more extreme color grades and editing tools that we'll get to in a minute. And what I love about these presets is in many cases they'll give me a final polished image with a look that is completely different than what I might initially imagine. So for me, this shot looks very rustic and I might think, oh, this could go into a sepia tone, but sometimes I might find a look that is completely different and it changes the direction I go altogether. Sometimes I find myself looking through the cinema presets. One that's kind of interesting is this Technicolor. This is Technicolor Process 2. And it's adding a lot of reds and warmth to the image. Looks kind of interesting. Maybe I'll bring this down to 28%. And as I turn this on and off, you can see it's adding a little warmth to their skin, which was kind of what I was trying to do when I moved the white balance over to the magenta side. I was trying to add just a little bit of warmth, a little bit of pink to their skin. This does it in a fairly subtle way, at least when I have it turned down. I think I like the way that looks. And then sometimes I like to just zoom out, make the image a lot smaller, kind of step back and say, you know, if I just saw this image small on the web, or if I was walking by a store and this was, you know, in a window or on a catalog, would this sit well with me? And I think this looks pretty good. I actually think Augusta's face back here could actually be a little brighter. So why don't we come back here to our burn layer and let's just turn that exposure up just a little bit. Something like that looks pretty good. So let's move on to some of these other images. So as you can see here, these images were the ones that we shot on the 110mm lens, and they're a little more straightforward. These were just with the hard light, and then you had the interesting light coming off to the side. This particular image is really nice. I think all I really need with this is just, you know, maybe tweaking the white balance just a little bit. Maybe I shot it a little too warm. And like most of my edits, I might bump the shadows up a little bit. I might pull the highlights down just a little bit. And then for an image like this, maybe we just make the overall exposure a little brighter and then crush the blacks just a little bit. Something like that might be all that this image needs. Perhaps the most moody images from the set were these here of Shelby in the barn, and I absolutely love these. Now, these might be a little moodier than what a designer or boutique store would want, but I think these are probably my favorite images of the entire set outside of the two shots with them in the cabin. This one probably has the best light on it. I love the contrast on her face, but we had not added the smoke yet, and we didn't have the backlight. So the background's really dark, and she's a little flirty in this image, which I like, but if we go to the other shots, I think she's just a little bit more elegant. Now for this image, the edit that I would like to do is I want to focus really on two main things. First, I want to bring out some of the detail of the dress and some of the deep shadows here in the bottom right. And then the second thing I might do to really accentuate this stripe of light is maybe I burn in some of this background here just subtly in post so that we can really, feel like we see that beam of light coming across the image. So because I just want to bring up some of the shadows in this corner and not the entire image, what I'm going to do is come up here to add layer, and I'm going to select my layer mask. Let's just come down here to dodge, and if I scroll down to our little settings down here, basically this is just bringing up the exposure. If I invert this mask, dodge is just making everything much brighter. Let's also bring the shadows up. That looks pretty nice. Maybe even bring the blacks up a little bit. And I like bringing these whites up. And what I'm looking at is this highlight on her arm. I don't know that I'm going to mask this in, but if I do, I prefer having a little bit of definition in the arm, whereas if I pull this down, you can see her arm just goes really gray. So maybe just up like 20%. It's probably pretty good. And because it's the shadows that I'm bringing up, I might even bring the temperature down a little bit so that when I reveal this, it's a little bluer in tone and not so warm. So now we're going to invert our mask so that everything is hidden. We're going to come up here to our brush tool. Let's go to flow. 25 is pretty good. Let's make this a nice large brush, and let's just brush in some of the detail down here on the bottom part of this frame. Now we can play with the overall intensity here. As you can see at 100%, this might be a little much. I also think I missed a spot, so let me hit the brush tool. Let's go to eraser. Let's make this a smaller brush. Let's just paint out some of this little bit right here. We don't want to bring more detail back in the background. And then with the overall intensity, I might just bring this down to, 45. And I also think I'm going to erase a little bit more off of her hand here. And this corner is doing nothing for me. And the art of this is to go really subtle. If you go too extreme with this, it's just not going to look natural. If I toggle this on and off, you can see what we have here. It's bringing back just enough attention to where you can see the dress. Maybe her arm has a little hot spot right here. Something like that is really nice. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to tackle this background that's just a little too bright for my liking, caused by the backlight that we used. So we can come up here to add layer, and for this one let's select burn or darken. And now with the brush, let's just paint in. I kind of want to replicate this stripe that's going through the image from, top right down to the bottom left. So maybe we just dodge a little bit. Something like that looks pretty cool. Now with this type of commercial work, one thing that you always have to tweak a little bit is skin retouching. Now Shelby, if we zoom in here and let this render, she has pretty amazing skin already, but we may want to just do a slight skin retouch and add a little bit of blur to the skin so that it's a little softer, especially if we're going to print this out. One thing that's really cool about Exposure X5 that I don't think they had in previous software, maybe they did, I just never used it, is the Portrait Touch-Up preset. So if I open this up, they have touch-up background, touch-up and red eye. We don't have red eye here, so if I click the touch-up, it's going to automatically add 3 different layers on top of my image. They're going to be hidden with layer masks. One of them is teeth whiten. I don't really need to use that because I can't see her teeth. The other one here, you can't read this, but it's eye enhancement. See if I can pull this out so you can see this a little bit better. Enhance iris. Maybe I will do this one. Let's come down here and let's select our brush and just paint out her irises. You can see it brings a lot out in her eyes. Let's actually zoom out here. Let's turn off our brush, zoom out, and that might be a little extreme. So you can always come back here with the overall intensity. Let's pull this down to like 41%, and I think that looks a lot more natural. But we were trying to retouch skin, right? So let's come up here to the soften skin effect. If we turn off this layer mask, invert it, and what you can see when we turn off the layer mask is this has just added kind of a blurred effect that we can then manually paint back in. If we come down here to focus, this effect has been caused by the blur here. So if you want to tweak this and add more or less blur, you can just come down here to radius. Let's bump this up to maybe 70. If I toggle this on and off, you can see just how big of a difference this makes. So for this demonstration, I'm just going to leave it really extreme like this, and my goal is to come back up here and to just subtly brush this in. So with a large soft brush, I might just paint in just a little bit right here on the front part of her cheek. This is the side that's closest to the camera. It's also going to be the sharpest. And then maybe just a little bit right up here above her brow. The way that hard light is hitting her skin, hard light adds a lot of hard shadows and it gives nice contrast, but sometimes that contrast also gives you the most definition in the skin. Now I have to admit, this skin retouching layer is not the most subtle, nuanced way to retouch skin, but if you're looking at something just quick and easy without having to go in there and like remove every pore and spend literally with 100 megapixels in this image, I mean, you could spend hours trying to get skin perfect. This is going to be a pretty quick solution that is good enough just to give your clients. If they want to go crazy and hire a retoucher or pay you extra to retouch skin, they can do that. But for me, I just want to do something that just softens it up just a little bit. And so this is the final effect. If I toggle this off and on, I've brushed it into this image in a way that it is a fairly subtle effect. And of course, we brought down the overall intensity to, I don't know, about 40%. So now let's zoom back out. I think that is a pretty cool image. Let's hit before and after. And if I want, I can always come back down to this bottom layer. Remember, we didn't really do anything with the bottom layer. And I can just tweak this just a little bit. Maybe I want to bring the exposure up just a little bit. Pop the whites. Let's bring those up to 33. And then maybe bring our highlights up just a little bit. If we do the before and after, you can see it brought a lot of detail out of her eyes. And then we brought all of those shadows up here in the bottom right. Very subtle effects. I'm not going crazy with this stuff. The final thing I want to do is let's come up here to the top, let's add a new layer, and let's work on a final color grade. What's pretty interesting here is they have the Fujifilm simulations, which be interesting to see how closely these resemble the ones actually in the camera. Let's do something crazy here. Let's go down to cross-processing, and as I mentioned before, sometimes I like to click on things that I would never think would work. Let's try this EPP blue shadows. And as you can see, this looks a little crazy. It's so purple. But if we bring down the overall intensity, and then we can turn this layer on and off. You can see what it's doing. It's taking all these warm tones and it's putting just a little bit of pink and purple in them. I think that's kind of cool. Let's zoom in here. Let's turn this on and off. I think this looks really cool. This image is already super moody and it's lit in a way that's not very traditional. I think adding a crazy color contrast to this with the blues and the shadows pulls this together. So while it might be over the top at 100%, if you bring this down to, 23% or something, maybe I could even go up just a little bit more, maybe around 40. I think that's kind of a cool final edit. Let's jump into the last set. I know this is getting long, but these were the images shot in the field with the gravity backdrop. And what I loved about this shoot, you can't really see it here because I have the white balance so warm, but if I bring this down just a little bit, I loved that the colors in this painted backdrop matched so much of the colors in the field. It had a lot of pinks and subtle taupe colors and beige colors. It was the perfect color backdrop to have out on location. So when I look at these different images, all three of these images are pretty cool. Towards the end of the night, I tried to do some shots with the two girls, but I feel like the light was already so dark. Wasn't really digging them, but I was still using that one single Profoto light as hard light. It was just, at this time of day, it was just getting harder to pull in the ambient light by slowing the shutter. There just wasn't any light really available. And then finally, I put it in a soft lighter, so I have some softer light here, but you can just see the light levels are so low by this point. So I think the image I would like to edit is going to be one of these three. And while my favorite shot is probably this one with the more serious look, I think I'm going to actually edit the one here where she's smiling. I think this probably has more commercial viability. So the first thing I want to do is I've shot this really, really warm for this time of day. So let's bring the white balance down a little bit, and let's bring out the natural colors of the backdrop and bring it within kind of a more normal color range. We could probably pop the shadows up quite a bit since we've lost so much detail in the background. Could probably bump the whites up just a little bit. I don't want to lose too much detail in the dress. And then if we come down here and pull the highlights down, I actually think this image suffers a little bit by pulling the highlights down too much. You can kind of see it's getting very muddy. So maybe I just bring the highlights up. Actually, I'm just going to keep the highlights at 0. I think that looks pretty good right there. Next thing I'm going to do is bump the clarity up just a little bit. Many times I like to bump the vibrance up and just see what it does to my colors. One trick that I've done for years is to bump the vibrance up, but then pull the saturation down just a little bit. So maybe I go up plus 30 on the vibrance, but then minus 10 on the saturation. And if we do the before and after, you can see I just had way too warm of a white balance out on the field, but I think this really evens everything up. Now, the one thing I want to play around with a little bit here is the perspective. Because I was shooting on the ground up at our model, I was using a 110mm lens, but on the GFX 100, I think that's closer to like an 85mm lens. I am getting a little bit of that distortion here in the backdrop. So if I come down here to transform, and if I pull my verticals down a little bit, it helps straighten out that effect. I don't know that I need this backdrop perfectly horizontal. I don't think I really care one way or another, but using the horizontal slider, I can start to twist the image to make it line up perfectly. So let's just say I want to get it as straight as possible. That might be something I do there. And then if I click the constrain crop key here, it's going to cut out all the black. And then coming back down to my transform sliders, I can go to the x-axis and line this up just a little bit more so that she's more centered. That looks really nice. Now, one filter that they have in Exposure X5 that I think would work really well with this image is the bokeh. I'm thinking I may want to blur these edges, especially this left side, a little bit more and kind of exploit that shallow depth of field look that I got in camera out on location. I just want to accentuate that a little bit more. So I might come up here to add layer and then come down to, I could either do this with focus, but they have the bokeh. Let's see what this does. If I go to presets and do traditional lenses, I don't think I want to do anything too crazy with the aperture. You can do a lot of different effects in here by adding stars and haloing and really strange stuff. Let's do the Canon 85 1.2, shot at 1.2. That's pretty similar to what we were using, just on a larger camera. I think I want it to still have some detail in the middle. Something like that's pretty good. Let's go up to our mask. And then with a soft, large brush, I think I'm just going to paint out some of this. I don't need it up here on the grip stand. That might make it appear a little too fake. And then maybe I just want to bring it back just a touch on the corners, especially here in the middle. And let's bring the overall intensity down just a touch, maybe down to 54. So now if I toggle this on and off, you can see it just adds that little bit of dreamy element on the side. So I really like that. Another thing I could add that I've not done yet is a vignette. Now, some people love vignettes, other people hate vignettes. Now the way Exposure X5 works is if I bring this to the left, it's going to add the white vignette. But if I bring it to the right, it's going to start to add the darkening effect. And I can toggle this on and off right here. And I think that's a pretty good stopping point. I love the way that image looks. One thing that's cool about the way I was shooting this is if I come to the crop tool and change the orientation of my crop, here's kind of the original idea that I had with this whole photo shoot. With a crop like this, it now looks like she's standing outside, almost against a building or something. but you would never know that this was a backdrop. But having this many megapixels, it gives you options. So I'm gonna come down here to history, let's reset that crop. And finally, let's add a new layer. Let's come down here to our presets and let's find a preset that will just give this image a final look. Let's go down here to bright. Bright is one of the new presets that they've added to Exposure X5. Maybe creamy highlights. Let's see what this does. And you can see this gives a very airy, muted kind of tone. If I toggle this on and off, it's definitely blowing out a lot of the highlights. It might be a little too much for my tastes, but I do see this look used quite often. If we bring down the overall intensity, maybe to like 59, I think that's a cool looking final image. So I think this image turned out great. This isn't something I normally would do, but I love the feel of this. And if you've ever looked at work by, say, Ann Leibovitz, she does this sort of stuff all the time where you have backdrops and sets built outside. I think this is the next step I would like to take in creating some of my portfolio images, is making things look more intentional and putting more production value into the actual shoot so that it doesn't just look like you took a girl into a field. We actually did a lot with the locations that were presented to us. If you have any questions about the gear used in this video, head to the description below. We have links to every single piece of equipment that I used on this photo shoot, including some special deals through some of the manufacturers, so make sure you look for those. If you guys want more content like this, head over to fstoppers.com where we have free articles every single day. And if you want to learn from some of the best photographers in the world, photographers who are way better than me, head over to fstoppers.com/store where you can check out our full-length tutorials.